Shoving a PS2 controller up Celestia's ass. Written by Joey King. Narrated by Jake Furman. Chapter 1. I put a whole bag of jelly beans up my ass. Twilight was in her treehouse library reading a book with the title Five Nights at Anime on the front cover, which also featured a hot female bear with big Honka Doonkla Chonka Maloon Malinga Nono Zomi Zuwa Zui Mama Longa Bonga Donkas Guka Baka Duka Lonka Dunka Bobka Tronka Bonka Lonka Bonkas. Jesus Christ, I don't get paid enough for this shit. Twilight blushed at the content of what she read and then randomly got bored as she suddenly gave a deadpan look at nowhere in particular and used her horn's magic to clap the book shut and rest it on a table. Twilight tiredly drifts to the kitchen and opens a top cabinet door with a single item in it that was a big, fat, white cylinder-shaped plastic container with a black lid. Twilight used her horn's magic to telepathically float it over her head and lightly rested on the kitchen counter, and used her teeth to open the lid elegantly. Twilight then spun the container 180 degrees to show its label, which was a piece of ripped paper taped to the side of the container, which read in all caps, "Cocaine!" And so, Miss Sparkle of wondrous magic and more, glanced down at the overflowing sugar in an elegant stare that only Rarity would give. Then suddenly shoved her entire head into the container faster than any sonic rain boom ever recorded and inhales as hard as she could, whiffing all the coke into her nasty-ass lungs and popped her head out of the now empty bin, and her eyes were instantly bloodshot. She pretty much looked just like herself when she first learned what Lesson 0 was, only her scleras were literally full-on vibrant tree frog red, and her entire face was spotless of any crack cocaine left, showing how perfectly she vacuumed those little Miralax wannabe particles through her moist nostrils. Upon darting her head randomly around the room, she saw Spike and darted her head toward him with a terrifying smile so quick, several loud neck-breaking cracks could be heard from her head whipping over to the worried dragon child. You okay, Twi? Erectile dysfunction! Twilight shouted as she galloped right at Spike's direction, about to ram him with her OP plot armor strength. But Spike dodged out of the way just in time, which had Twilight continue her momentum as she crashed out one of her windows and out laughing hysterically through Ponyville. As Twilight ran chaotically throughout Ponyville, her pupils dilated so intensely that only a thin ring of red made up the outline of each of her eyes. I am Princess Twilight Crackle, and I'm gonna kid your Among Us backwards! She laughed hysterically, galloping full speed in zigzag patterns as her tongue blabbered out of her mouth, like a rat dog or something, drooling all over the place with foam forming in her mouth and everything. Meanwhile, Applejack, Rarity, and Pinkie Pie were playing their own version of Uno outside of Sugar Cube Corner, but it was with a regular stack of 52 cards. Pinkie had 3 cards left, Rarity had 1, and Applejack had 2. It was also her turn to play. Diddy! Applejack called out, placing her 2 of diamonds on the stack with only 1 card remaining. Hey, wait, you can't do that! Pinkie shouted. Yeah, I can. It's in the rules. If I say Diddy, I can have 1 card left. You say, P. Diddy! Rarity shouted, interrupting Applejack. She quickly placed her final card on the stack, that one being the legendary Ace of Spades. Applejack sighed, then continued from the phrase Rarity said, like it was part of her sentence. When placing down the final card, P. Diddy is the game-ending word. No, I thought it was P. Diddler, Pinkie cried. I'm gonna pee your diddler if you don't shut the fuck up! Twilight rampaged right by the 3, leaving them in a dust storm for a brief moment, before the dust cleared, revealing all their cards flying high in the sky every which way. Twilight ran rapidly through Ponyville some more, disturbing the peace and all that. That's when, out of nowhere, something falls on Twilight's head, causing her to drunkishly stumble and crash headfirst into a small outdoor market of grapes, just like that one mean guy from that old time-traveling movie. The background pony, your OC here, who owned the fruit stand, ran away, and due to not paying attention, got knocked out by ramming straight into a sheet of glass 2 worker ponies were moving. Only it was reinforced glass and broke, your OC here, and not the transporting window. Twilight sat up and shook her head as the iconic wobble 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 sound effect played. She got up, still high on crack, and jolted her head down, making her neck sound like it just became all noodle and no bone, with an intensely frightening, smiling stare. Twilight didn't know what she was looking at. It was in the shape of a gaming controller of some kind, but not one from Equestria. It had clear plastic, so you could see all the components inside. It had 2 joysticks toward the bottom that were just plastic. No joystick padding or anything. It had 4 buttons on each side, the right having a blue X, purple square, red circle, and green triangle in a scratched out font, like they were made to look like gun crosshairs. The other 4 buttons being black arrows all pointing inwards toward each other. It had a 3 or 4 foot long black cord at the top of it too, with its ending being a flat and wide plug-in of some kind. Twilight picked up the weird thingy by the cord and chaotically galloped into the far distance. As she ran out of Ponyville and through the rolling hills of chronic summertime nature, Twilight in her mind wanted nothing more in the world than to keep this legendary artifact for her crack-headed self and store it somewhere where no pony can find it. But where? Chapter 2. And it's 24 hours later and I ain't find none yet. Twilight Crackdick neck-breakingly looked at Canterlot Castle in the far distance. So she suddenly made like a swiggity-swooty and instantly took off toward the castle, twice the speed as FNAF 1 Foxy, which that in itself is physically impossible. Twilight ran over and passed one hill after another for every millisecond until she vanished into the far distance towards Canterlot. Meanwhile, Princess Celestia was laying down on her soft, white, fluffy mat in front of her portable wooden coffee table in the middle of the throne room and sipped some liver disaster tea. Or was it constant common tea? Anyways, doesn't matter. Celestia slipped on some nice tea and had some bread on the side. And no, she did not know bread would make her fat. Celestia closed her eyes calmly as she took another calm sip. Suddenly, from one of the stained glass window panes on Celestia's right, was an instant Twilight jump scare with epic glass shattering behind the clearly mentally insane unicorn, ready to troll it down on her with that creepy, intoxicated smile. Somehow, time managed to slow down and Twilight managed to sing a little jingle in this epic, slow-mo moment whilst holding the clear PlayStation 2 controller high behind her head with her right hoof, like she was gonna aggressively throw it at her mentor. I'm T to the WILIGHT, and ain't no other pony troll it down like me. I'm shoving this up your fucking ass, Celestia! Twilight screamed as she tried to shrink it up where the sun don't shine, but missed the princess completely as she flew right over Celestia and out the adjacent window across the hall from where she shot it from. Tia just kinda stood there with her head following Twilight without any reaction. Once her faithful student crashed out the window, Celestia just plopped back down and continued to drink her Scott Pilgrim reference like nothing ever happened. There was shattered glass everywhere. Twilight screamed in hysterical laughter as she fell through the steep roof of another nearby tower that was lower than the royal chambers. Twilight became a lawn dart, crashing horn first into the marble flooring of this random tower that had a bunch of random junk in it. Debris of the roof fell onto the floor in some areas around Twilight, with her now neon glowing red eyes. They looked like a pair of 2 Xbox red rings of death. Twilight just kept that same cracked up smile, but her mouth was jittering like she was freezing to death, though still maintaining a perfectly insane smile. Twilight made like a wannabe pair of Cupcake's HD Rainbow Dash eyes and looked around the room at the randomized items stacked all around the circumference of the top floor in this tower like it was a storage unit. It probably was one. Back to good old Tia, she had eaten all her bread, so she elegantly used her right hoof to wipe the crumbs off her mouth with a napkin, then set it back on the coffee table. 2 royal servants came to take the table in a similar way as the 2 worker ponies in Ponyville, who knocked your character the fuck out with a piece of glass. Princess Celestia just sat there on her mat, staring into space as the warmth of the sun from the twilight burst inside windows had a bright ray of light filling the room, warming her white coat as the throne room doors slightly shut, leaving her alone in the room with her meditating thoughts. Twilight stared at Celestia through a tube that had a plush-shaped cross in it, with the intersection of that cross being right on Celestia's Uga Machunkin ass. Take that as you will. Twilight was looking through the scope of a fucking Serbu RN50 50 caliber rifle aimed right at Celestia through the other shattered stained glass window Twilight broke through when falling towards the tower's roof. Twilight was currently hovering mid-air using her horn's magic to lift herself up to Celestia's level while aiming the rifle at her. Twilight let out a witch-like cackle.
And now, I shall open fire ever so slightly above my precious little pony, as I must have to aim for le wall behind her. She shall dart her head and look at the bullet strike. Therefore, I shall distract her from that, and then leap back in Princess of Solar's now broken window, and shove this epic dookie up her ass!
She held the controller in the air using her magic as both her front hooves were preparing to fire the 50 caliber weapon and hopefully not assassinate her practical godmother. Twilight held the gun in a hip firing position, meaning she no longer had a clue where the bullet would strike, but thought it would be a better way to take the shot because she was very much so still high on 5 whole pounds of cocaine. Twilight let out a wild "Yeehaw!" clearly stolen from Applejack, and pulled the trigger. The entire rifle exploded, sending Twilight to hell knows where in the sky. Celestia noticed absolutely nothing and continued to soak in the warm sun of the nice and sunny day. She was too locked in the moment to notice the sound of the explosion of a piece of equestrian technology that shouldn't exist in whatever time period this was. Chapter 3. But then he asks me, "Do you know where my car keys are?" I look at him in his face and I say. Twilight was suddenly awake and on the roof of a completely different tower, like nothing happened, and had a pair of binoculars as she watched Princess Celestia doing a weird dance where she was wobbly whipping her head around in all directions, making her neck look like a macaroni noodle minus the cheese. Twilight could clearly hear Weezer playing at full blast inside the throne room, Buddy Holly to be exact. Twilight cackled as she used her magic to teleport to the same window she broke in through, but it was fixed, possibly by Princess Celestia's magic. Twilight teleported into the throne room, standing on the red carpet. Standing right in front of Twilight was a magical mane tornado swirling over an oddly fat ass. Twilight would like to describe what grand details she saw, but despite already knowing this fanfic got a mature rating, she preferred not to say. Wait, what's a fanfic? Twilight asked herself, suddenly confused about whatever the hell she just thought. Like for a moment, her sense of crack was gone, and she was back to normal. Only for her to suddenly foam from the mouth like a rabid horse again, when Celestia turned around to face her. Celestia instantly got startled by the weird grimace-colored purple guy mare. "Twilight!" she cried.
Hey, Celestia!
Twilight creepily and softly said, then lightly giggled, which turned into a horrific laughter that only some unknown villain could scream out. Celestia backed up ass first to the boxy TV screen behind her that was ripped straight out of the 2000s, sitting on a metal pushcart that could double as a portable stand-up desk. The Weezer Blue album cover was shown on screen, with the 4 straight-faced guys perfectly symbolizing how you should react if you saw Celestia's ass back up toward you. On the outside, you pretend that the big fluffy beanbag ain't there, but on the inside, your sanity confronts your inner demons, as there is a constant mental war on whether or not you should... Yeah, not gonna finish that sentence. Twilight crept closer to her mentor with the PS2 controller in hoof. Celestia felt genuinely scared of Twilight. She never acted this way before. Celestia didn't even remember when Twilight broke her windows because the power of Weezer made her mind reset to the mentality she had before even encountering Twilight in this state.
Twilight?
Celestia asked cautiously, seeing if the real Twilight Sparkle was still in there. That's when all 4 dudes in the TV got their satisfactory load of Celestia as she bumped her behind into the TV, sending it to fall off the pushcart table and down to the ground, splitting the TV up into large fragments. Rivers, Patrick, Matt, and Brian each shed a slight tear out of their right eyes in sync before the TV screen flickered and shut off permanently.
All right, teacher. You know what I'm gonna do now?
Twilight asked chaotically.
Play ATV Off-Road Fury 2 with me?
Celestia smiled nervously down at Twilight.
I love your taste in cultured games such as that one. But no,
Twilight growled whisperingly.
I'm gonna shove this up the fucking ass!
She screamed. Just then, DJ Pone3 randomly appeared, sitting on Celestia's throne with her DJ setup like she'd been there the whole time. She was spinning a record on her hoof and slammed it down onto the turntable as Up the Fucking Ass by Tony Orr echoed throughout the royal hall. Twilight leapt onto Celestia's back and rode her like a bull. Celestia let out a wild neigh and galloped randomly around the room, jumping around aggressively to get rid of the mare behind the slaughter attached onto her back. Twilight then stood up on Celestia's back and used her to a sick kickflip. Twilight kicked down on the alicorn's back, causing her to do a funky barrel roll while Twilight hopped in the air. Upon landing back on the fully rotated Celestia, who landed perfectly back on the ground, a sudden orchestral hit flared the room for a split second before echoing out of existence as yellow text appeared next to the 2 chaotic steeds that read, 5,000 Celestial Kickflip! Twilight did a backflip on Princess Celestia's back and grabbed onto her tail, hanging on like a resilient leech. Twilight had the controller in her hoof, and she tried to aim for the weak spot. She punched her hoof forward towards the place where the sun don't shine, but was just barely too far off distance as all Twilight managed to do was slap the controller onto Celestia's ass, not stuffing it inside.
You don't get it! You don't get it, Celestia! If I don't shove this doohickey up your ass right now, it'll be the end of the world!
Twilight shouted through the wind caused from Celestia sprinting around the throne hall in circles. Well, more so ovals because the room is a long-ass fucking rectangle. The song changed as Vinyl held up another record, spun it on her hoof, and slammed it down onto the other side of the turntable, this time playing the Twilightlicious remix by Sim Gratina. Twilight managed to pull herself slightly farther up Celestia's tail, and was almost close enough to shove the PlayStation 2 controller up her ass. It seemed like it would never end. Chapter 4.
Have you checked your bottle?
Dubstep sung by a low-quality voice of Twilight filled the room as Celestia struggled to fling the mare off her tail. Then she had an idea. Celestia then instantly stopped and began to chase her own tail while spinning in a circle, hoping Twilight would be sent flying from the intense circular motion of G-Force. Twilight held on for dear life, though her face only showed that of an average cracked-up Karen at a local Walmart. Celestia was then spinning so fast, no one could tell the difference between the Princess of Equestria and a spinning toy that became a dead meme sometime after 2017. Celestia finally felt Twilight's grip slip down slightly closer to the end of her tail, away from Celestia's big booty McTucci. So Celestia started galloping around the room once more and purposefully rammed right into DJ Pone3's setup. Unfortunately for Vinyl, she couldn't use her sick-ass DJ name anymore, as her setup was obliterated into tiny bits of electronics and broken dreams. Celestia trampled over the debris like it was nothing and continued her ellipse-shaped gallop. Vinyl fell to her knees with her jaw hanging open in shock as her cool shades fell off her face and shattered on the ground. The funny part is her glasses were plexiglass, so they logically wouldn't have shattered, but they did anyway. Twilight, still clinging onto Celestia's tail, took one hoof and brought it to her own purple bum. Twilight's eyes became so impossibly dilated that they looked completely blacked out, with white reflecting sparkles in them. Twilight shoved her own hoof up her own ass until her foreleg was halfway deep in the mystery hole and started to jolt her foreleg around like she was searching for something. A few seconds later, she aggressively pulled out a banana and squeezed it, causing the edible part of the berry to slip out the peel and right into Twilight's mouth hole. Twilight flung the banana peel overhead of Celestia and it plopped perfectly dead ahead. Celestia noticed the peel and tried to stop by braking like a car with all 4 hooves. But before she could stop in time, she slipped on the banana peel as Twilight let go of Celestia's tail. Celestia was sent flying upwards as the classic cartoon slip sound effect played. She did maybe like 6 or 7 front flips in the air before landing hard on her right side onto the red carpet, close to the throne room doors. Twilight menacingly stared down at her godmother, with Celestia looking back up at her in fear.
You don't have to do this, Twilight,
Princess Celestia said, before Twilight shoved her hoof back into her own ass and pulled out the same damn controller. Twilight crept up to Celestia until she was standing above Celestia's 2 hind legs. Celestia was too scared to move even though she could end this situation right now at any time. Celestia was shivering in fear of her own pupil and seeing what she has become, a serial pony stuffer. Twilight sat down right behind Celestia's legs. Because Celestia was laying sideways, both her legs were pointed out in front of her, making her horse-shaped body look like a backwards L shape when looking from above. Twilight gave a very unnerving stare as her fully blacked out eyes suddenly got smaller until they were the size of breadcrumbs within just half a second. Twilight had the controller in hoof, raising it far behind her head as she stared at the target.
Dear Princess Celestia, I'm gonna shove this PlayStation 2 controller up your fucking ass!
Twilight yelled. Twilight fisted the controller up where the sun couldn't ever rise again, and Celestia let out a devastating scream so loud all of Equestria could hear it. Meanwhile, some pony, or in this case, someone, wrote on a blank page.
Dear Princess Celestia, today I witnessed Twilight sniff a whole container of pure cocaine and ran out to heck knows where. A few moments ago, I felt a great disturbance in the force, as if millions of horses cried out in terror and was suddenly silenced. I feel something terrible has happened. Spike.
And that was how Twilight Sparkle shoved a PlayStation 2 controller up Princess Celestia's ass.
I'm a banana.